6 options for commercial real estate landlords when their tenants can't pay their rent. Hi, I'm Shirley Johnson Boyd. I'm a commercial broker licensed in and serving the Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. metro areas. Today I'd like to talk about some options commercial real estate landlords can take when their tenants can't pay their rent. This is especially prevalent today because of the many shuttered businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's jump right in. Let's first talk about some property ownership facts. There are 2 ways that landlords control property. They could own the property free and clear, and that's either from purchasing cash in the first place or they have a mortgage at one time that has since been paid in full. Another way landlords control property is by a mortgage loan. The loan can be with a bank or with private investors. Some type of private investors include hard money lenders, people investing using their retirement funds in a self-directed IRA account, and syndicators, which are essentially brokers that pool money together from different investors, usually accredited investors, for commercial real estate purchases. Now let's look at some options, the 6 options that landlords have for helping their tenants. The first option is to reduce the rent. The landlord can reduce the rent for the remainder of time on the lease. So if it's 6 months left on the lease, they might lower the payments by a couple $100s for each of the 6 remaining months. They could reduce the rent for a specified period of time, such as for 30 or 90 days for when it's estimated that businesses can start to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The landlord can convert the current rent payment from a fixed dollar amount to a percentage of rent amount. So this will be helpful to landlords because if they currently are not making any sales or very small sales, then paying rent according to what you make is an option. The landlord can convert the rent to a base amount from a fixed rent amount. So instead of paying a percentage sale, say if you had a large percentage of your sale and no base rent at all, they can convert the lease to a base amount, and you know every month how much you have to pay, $500, $2,000, or whatever the case may be based on the space. Or they can modify the rent and do a combination of base plus percentage. So situation dictates, and they will probably mix and match based on the unique situation of the particular landlord and tenant. Another way a landlord can help their tenant is to defer the rent. And they might choose to defer the rent again for a specific amount of time, such as 30, 60, 90 days. And then the rental payments that have been deferred can be tacked on to the remaining term of the lease. Like for the remainder of the year, they spread it out over the remaining 6 months or something like that. It can turn the unpaid rent into a separate loan. So that would be just a separate payment in addition to rent going forward after the 30, 60, 90 days are over. The deferred rent can be paid in a lump sum at a specific time, like in a year's time, to give the tenant time to recoup and for their business to get back up and running. They might say, well, you don't have to pay me for a year. You just pay that back rent money in a year. A third option is rent abatement. In this scenario, you might have a landlord that is more concerned with keeping the tenant than receiving the rent. And this would serve for the landlord to not have to evict the tenant, which is very costly and time consuming. They will be ensured that the space is leased. And if they evicted the tenant, and you would have to release the space and then have to deal with tenant improvement. Either the expense is going to come out of the cash money out of the landlord's pocket, or they might give some type of concessions to the new tenant for them to do the tenant improvements called TI. And then maybe the first 2 months in the new lease, they don't have to pay rent or something like that. It's like a credit. So abatement is usually going to be for a specific amount of time, a couple months or something like that, depending on the situation. And just to be clear, that rent abatement will probably only be done if the landlord owns the property free and clear, or if they have sufficient reserves. Otherwise, the landlord is going to need the rent payments to be able to pay the commercial real estate loan monthly, just like any other type of real estate loan. The fourth option is to convert the unpaid rent into a loan. Now, we touched on that briefly a few minutes ago, but essentially what the landlord would do is take those maybe 90 days, 120 days, and wrap a mortgage or a loan around it based on the terms that the landlord and the tenant agreed upon. The benefits to the landlord is that you retain the tenant, so you don't have to worry about having to evict the tenant or the tenant trying to sneak out in the middle of the night. You would be assured of getting the back payments of rent at some future date, and you can further take that note and sell it for cash. So there are people that buy discounted notes because they're buying the income stream, and you can sell that for a discount. So let's say if the note ends up being $2,000, you might be able to get $1,700 cash for it. So that allows you to get cash right now today. The benefit to the tenant is that you will still have your lease, so you can still keep your business up and running, and you have a time frame to repay the back rent, and you know what the terms are. A fifth option for landlords helping their tenants who can't pay rent is to apply the deposit to the rent payment. Now, commercial leases, just like residential leases, the tenant usually pay a deposit, just like anything else you're renting, and there are pluses and minuses to applying that deposit to the rent. A benefit of applying the deposit to the rent is that the tenant remains current on rental payments. The landlord receives timely rent and can make payments on their commercial real estate loan to the bank or the private investor or whoever they got the mortgage loan through. A disadvantage of applying the deposit to the rent payments is that the landlord will exhaust the security deposit money, and so when the tenant does finally move out, if there are damages, the security deposit will no longer be there to tap into to help remediate those damages. Another option would be in that situation to go to court, but then that's a timely, it's going to take time, and it's going to be an additional cost. A disadvantage to the tenant is that if the tenant was expecting to get their deposit back on the back end for when they go to a new location, they buy their own property or whatever, that won't be an option, but at least they will be current on their rent. The sixth and final remedy that we're going to talk about today is the tenant subleasing the space. Subleasing is not going to absolve the tenant from being responsible for the lease payments and for taking care of the property. Subleasing, the tenant usually brings in someone to cover some or all of the space and applicable fees that go with that space. But not all leases allow tenants to sublease their space, and some leases require the tenant to get approval of the landlord prior to subleasing. So subleasing could be a sticky situation. So you would definitely need to read your lease and see what the lease says about subleasing. And you would need to make sure that if you don't understand what you're reading or some clauses or something, to check it out with your attorney. Again, always review your lease before even attempting to sublease the space. So what do we do now? Where do we go? Tenants, call your landlord and discuss your options. Your landlord is not going to be able to help you if they don't know you're having a problem. So you have to open up and communicate with your landlord. Landlords, likewise, you need to be proactive and call your tenants to see what's going on with your tenants and engage them so you can work together to formulate a plan to solve the problem. Communicate, communicate, communicate. This is a temporary problem that everyone knows, thinks, and expects it to be a temporary problem. But again, if we can work together, we can all get through it together. I hope this information was helpful for you as you go through dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic. Please share this information with other people who you think might be able to benefit. And if you need more information, my contact information is on the screen. You can email me, you can call me directly or through the office. But in the meantime, let's just be optimistic. We'll all get through this global crisis together. Take care of yourself, take care of each other. Again, share this information with people who you think might could benefit from it. And this is Shirley Johnson Boyd signing off, and see you next time.